Welcome to Embedded. I am Alicia White, alongside Christopher White. Our guest this week, well, we're going to talk about fashion and robots. I'm excited. Our guest is Natalie Friedman.
Hi, Natalie. Welcome.
Thank you. Hi.
Could you tell us about yourself as if we met at NYC Resistor?
Sure. My name is Natalie. I'm a PhD candidate at Cornell Tech, working on designing clothing for robots. So NYC Resistor is actually 20 minutes away from my university. Cornell Tech is a satellite campus of Cornell on Roosevelt Island in Manhattan. So I guess I would say I'm an art generalist and also a human-robot interaction researcher. I studied cognitive science. So I'm looking at robots from a social science perspective, and now I'm in the field of human-robot interaction. So things that I would study are how can we make robots more socially appropriate? How close should robots physically be to you, like say in an elevator? And how tall should robots be to make people more comfortable? So I'm looking at clothing for robots, and I've always been kind of crafty. I've been into jewelry and pottery, photography, painting, drawing, and it's always fun for me to learn new methods for crafting. So I wanted to learn how to sew, and this is while I was studying human-robot interaction. So I thought, like, how could robots just move more beautifully, like in animation, right? Because robots tend to be kind of rigid in their movement. So I sewed up a skirt for Blossom the robot, and had Blossom twirl, and it was totally magical, and the rest was history.
Excellent. We want to do lightning round where we ask you questions.
Okay.
Short questions, and we want short answers. And if we're behaving ourselves, we won't ask what exactly conductive thread do you prefer, but maybe we will.
Okay.
Are you ready?
Yes.
Art or technology?
Art.
Favorite fabric?
Linen.
Buttons, snaps, or zippers?
Snaps.
Conductive thread, yes or no? And if so,
Yes.
what kind?
Yes, and with a low resistance.
Favorite non-fictional robot?
Ooh. Blossom.
Okay, I'm not familiar with that, and we're going to
Is
break
that
the rules,
Gilmore
and you're
Girls?
going to have to tell me. Gilmore Girls?
Wasn't there somebody named Blossom but I don't think she was a robot.
Blossom was its own show, but she was not a robot. She was...
Okay.
Who is Blossom?
Blossom is a robot made at Cornell, and it's made with rubber bands and wood, and it's like a DIY robot.
Okay, we'll have to look up a picture of that.
Sure.
And do you have a favorite place to watch whales in Santa Cruz?
I would say the boardwalk.
Complete one project or start a dozen?
Start a dozen.
If you could teach a college course, what would you want to teach?
A small studio course about clothing for fashion designers, or for robots. And I would teach it to fashion designers and social scientists together.
Favorite fictional robot?
Eva from WALL-E.
The popular one.
Yeah.
Do you have a tip everyone should know?
Okay, when you buy peanut butter, all the oil is usually at the top, but if you flip it over before you eat it, then the oil gets evenly distributed.
Why are you looking at
the
me?
peanut butter.
You store it upside down because I have seen you put them right side up in the cupboard.
Well, I don't eat the peanut butter.
I know, so why do you...
So what does it matter to me?
I just want to give credit to Marsha Carlin. She gave me that tip.
Okay, so robots and clothes. You said it's about human robot interaction, human computer interaction. Mm-hmm. It's not about clothes themselves that are robotic. No smart scarves that open doors for me.
It's that does sound cool, but yeah, I'm talking about robots that are wearing clothes to support their own tasks, and then like indirectly your tasks, right, with the robot. So for example, I was working on an agriculture robot tractor, and I designed a tool belt for that tractor. So that's kind of an example, right? It's supporting the robot's tasks. It's going up and down the greenhouse while someone grabs into its tool belt and pulls out a pair of scissors. And it's also supporting the robot.
Oh, so the tool belt was for the human companion, not for the robot.
Right. It's supporting their task together. But,
Okay.
right.
It didn't seem like robots would like pockets as much as I do.
Well, they're often like the clothing is made after the robot is made, right? So it's not necessarily programmed for an arm to reach into itself.
I saw Simone Yacht did a YouTube video where she made an arm, a robotic grabby arm, out of stained glass.
Oh, wow.
And it was very pretty, although given the tears towards the end when it failed, it seemed very difficult. Are you trying to make things prettier, more approachable, or more like the utility belt where you're trying to solve two problems, or you're trying to solve the human's problem, not the robot's problem?
I would say that clothes can do a lot of those things. And I try to make it happen for each of those things. So, for example, that utility belt, it was going to the Stanford Educational Farm, and the colors that, like, for that farm on their logo is red. So I made sure that, like, there was kind of that branding on the utility belt. And then in this case, it wasn't so protective. But there actually were some holes in the robot that water could get into. So it ended up by accident just covering up those holes. And then aesthetically, yeah, I would say that, like, social signaling through color is kind of an aesthetic choice, but not necessarily pretty. I think it really depends on the context. So, for example, maybe Lady Gaga is doing a performance and she wants to bedazzle her mic and to match her costume, right? So I think that that's a case where you want to think a lot about, like, aesthetics.
So do you think that beautiful robots will be more alluring to humans than non-beautiful robots?
I think so. I think that there's some risk making robots beautiful because they might not belong in their environment, right? Like, wearing a very fancy dress to a utilitarian environment might look wrong. So I think I prioritize matching the context more than just being, like, aesthetically beautiful.
So when should robots wear clothes? I mean, it seems silly. I'm sorry. I know
okay.
this is your PhD research, but it does seem a little silly that, I mean, I have in my mind a robot arm with a tutu on it, which is not what you're talking about.
Here I am thinking this is a great idea because you get used to, okay, I know this is a little bit off topic, but it's on my mind and I'm going to forget. In an industrial situation, you get used to the machinery that's around you, and you might not see it the same way after a few weeks of working with it.
Definitely.
But if you were to change the appearance of a robot arm periodically, dress it up however you want with a tutu or whatever, you would see that arm and you would not get so used to it and perhaps miss something that it was doing incorrect or decide that you didn't see it and it whacks into you. It just seems like that would be an application that would be important of changing visual appearances so that you don't get too complacent with a mechanical environment.
Okay.
I like that idea. It reminds me of an idea my advisor had one time about changing the clothes when there's a status update in the software. So just to remind a person, hey, this is a new and improved robot.
I like that, yeah.
Yeah, but in what you said, it kind of reminded me of, just changing the appearance for more attention.
And it's a good excuse to dress up robots in clothes. I mean...
Right?
Does it have to be human equivalent clothes? Or is it any covering? What are you focused on?
Yeah. I tend to look at the materials and textures and colors that people would wear in the environment and match those rather than thinking, oh, it needs to wear eyelashes to look more like a human.
This robot needs pants. It doesn't have legs, but it still needs pants.
It needs pants. Speaking of that, so one of the first prototypes that I made for that utility belt, I I put a belt, like a long belt around the whole robot, and it got stuck in the plants. That and it didn't need the belt. It was just me thinking, oh, it needs to wear a belt because it's wearing a utility belt, and that is what people wear. So it can be dangerous to take things, shapes and forms from people and just apply it to robots.
Sure.
But you are calling them clothes and not enclosures.
That's a good point. This has been a really challenging topic, like figuring out what to call it. Like sometimes I want to call it fashion, but then my advisor says, hey, you're going to alienate all the engineers in a publication if you call it fashion. So clothes feels a little bit less, I don't know what the word is.
Girly?
Showy, maybe? Yeah, girly, showy, yeah.
It's a mundane term. It has clothes span the gamut from burlap sack to ball gowns. So.
And fashion is usually high fashion. So, okay, I can see that.
Right. And then coverings is something that we've considered. And I think that's even more mundane than clothes. But like, there's a casing, right? When you say enclosure, I think of like the casing that goes around the mechanisms in the robot.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of want to think about clothes as removable, and like to the average person that's not the engineer, right? So when you say enclosure, I think of the casing that comes with the robot, that is around the robot already.
Is part of the goal with dressing robots making them more anthropomorphic?
No. I think that it's really hard to get away from anthropomorphism. But really I'm just trying to have the robot fit better into its environment. And maybe protect the robot from dangling wires getting snagged, or from overheating. Maybe it can insulate the robot too.
But those are engineering functions that should be solved with enclosures. Go back to that word.
I totally agree. But sometimes robots end up in places that engineers don't expect. And I think that it happens a lot. So I think that clothes can kind of be that last step, solved after the fact when we watch the robot in the world and see where it ends up.
So you mentioned the utility belt. What other examples do you have?
So things that I've just seen out in the world already. During COVID, there was karaoke mic coverings that were getting replaced. And that kind of is an example of this, right? We didn't know what was going to happen. We didn't know that COVID was going to happen, right? So that was kind of an aftermarket solution. The mic that Lady Gaga uses during a performance. I've been thinking about thermochromic ink and the functions that it could have for robot clothing. So, for example, if part of the robot is overheating, we might be able to tell by the color changing.
Yes, when the smoke comes out, it's bad.
Yeah, you can make it, turn red and angry, like
that would
being
be really
anthropomorphic.
And so your degree is an art degree or a computer degree?
It's information science. So a lot of people that come out of that program tend to be user experience researchers, right? So they have a little bit of knowledge about technology, design, and engineering. Information science used to be a degree for librarians. And it's so fascinating to me that it covers now both human-robot interaction and library sciences.
Okay. I mean, those are information, yes.
Yeah.
How does robot clothing relate to information?
That's a great question. Well, there's a lot of information that clothes carry, right? Like there's all this fashion literature that I've been assigned. So there's like higher quality materials, right? And that might carry the information that a person is of higher class, right? Because they can afford it. And maybe that would apply to robots too.
Absolutely. Think of Apple's cases versus some of the Android cases. They feel more expensive.
Don't email us.
That's a really good point.
Yes. But okay, so indicating the robot status, indicating the robot owner's status.
Right.
Okay.
That's a good point. It's both.
What else?
What other kind of information?
Yes.
I guess I think clothing can communicate capabilities of robots too, or maybe enhance the motion. So, for example, you might add stripes to a rotating robot or some kind of swirl to show everyone that this is moving and kind of enhance that motion.
Oh, like on airplane turbines. There's a little.
Say more.
So on the if you look on the next time you look at a plane at the front end of the engines, there's the turbine, and then there's a little what do they call it? A nose cone or something on the turbine, and they have painted a little swirly on it, so you can see that it's moving. Because when it's moving, it's very hard to see the turbine blades, but you can see the swirly on the swirly on the nose cone. That's all I got.
Title option there.
Yeah.
And you mentioned the utility belt. That does indicate that this robot is doing something related to what is in its belt. So you could indicate function.
Right. And who exactly? And who is using the robot at the time, right? So maybe when the robot is walking alongside a farmer that's cutting basil, it would have scissors in the tool belt. But maybe when it's walking alongside an electrician who's fixing the robot or something else, it would carry tools for the electrician.
What do you want to do with your career after you get a degree?
That's a great question. I'm figuring it out.
That's the answer that says, I don't know.
I'm figuring it out. So one idea I had was thinking about maybe starting a company or working for someone who is making clothing for people that have prosthetics. Just because I've been thinking a lot about these questions of making clothing forms for alternative forms. Also, I have the skills to do user experience research. So probably user experience research at some robotics company. And hopefully I can use this knowledge of materials in some way as well. That's kind of where I'm at right now. I loved working at this agriculture robotics company because it meant I got to be outside and smell the basil, and just interact in the field. So that's where I'm at right now. That's what I'm thinking.
What led you to get a PhD?
Well, as an undergrad, I really liked doing research because of the way it was just so hands-on. And I always looked up to the PhD students that got to lead the research. And my advisor, Wendy Ju, she does design research, and it is very hands-on. So I thought, wow, that would be so great to be able to do design, which is something that I love outside of school, and then also research.
What did you get your undergrad degree in?
Cognitive science.
Oh, yes, you said that. I minored in cognitive science. It was really fun.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Awesome. That's cool.
So when you say user experience, I think of my days working on children's toys where we would get a mock-up of what the toy was supposed to do and then have some parents or kids poke it at the toy.
At the mock-up.
And then a person in the room would do the voice that would happen for the toy. And it was incredibly adorable. The whole process was just fantastic. Is that what you mean, or more large scale?
That sounds like so much fun. That is what I mean. I think that what you're describing maybe a little bit later stage where you're thinking about specific features. Mm-hmm. I like to do the early stage stuff. So just figuring out without even a research question in mind or a specific feature in mind, just what happens when people are around this robot and they're using it as they would. So that's usually early stage questions where you're still thinking about what features should exist to support the people and what they would already be doing with the robot.
So a robot in uniform would seem very different than a robot not in uniform. and a robot in a tutu.
Well, if you think about the robots we tend to see today, there's the all-white kind of plasticky security robots and
Sleek
androids that people are trying to make. Honda or Tesla or whatever. They all have these weird white plastic forms that are unadorned, or the heavily industrial robots that don't look like people's conceptions of robots, right?
I mean, they look like industrial robots.
Yes, but
I mean, there are the wires, and they're usually hooked around, but you can see the struts and the clamps, and the enclosures are for the little parts, not the whole big part.
Right.
I would say that they're naked. I think that there's a tendency for designers to want their robots to look very sleek, and to require less maintenance overall, right? If you have clothes, they could get dirty.
Yes.
But again, I think it depends on the context. So in a restaurant in Japan, for example, I saw the waiters that were robots dressed as the waiters that were people. So for that context, I think it makes a lot of sense for the uniforms to be similar.
They identify the robot's function in a way we understand.
Right, exactly.
Cool.
Exactly. Did I answer your question? I don't know that I did.
I don't remember what the question was.
Okay.
I probably derailed it. Sorry.
Do you think there is a role for having silly costumes on robots?
I do. I think that it can make the robots more approachable, especially to kids. And one could imagine a performance robot, right? Like being silly. I know, like Simone, like you mentioned, Simone Gertz, like her robots are totally silly, right?
Yes.
It's kind of the whole act.
It's the intention.
All right. And when I was teaching Girl Scouts how to build robots, and I brought a bunch of crafts with me. And I think that the crafting like around the robot made building robots more approachable. I think that sometimes this idea of like engineering and robotics can be kind of intimidating to kids, especially girls. And yeah, adding this element of something that's familiar, making it silly, can actually make the robots more approachable and building robots more approachable.
Using silliness to teach is fantastic. I that is the way I much prefer to learn.
I agree.
How much of your thinking, or not your thinking, but, well, okay, how much of what you think is appropriate or what people will respond to is guided by maybe what we've been acclimated to through popular culture? Because sci-fi has robots, right? When people think of robots, people outside of engineering maybe think of robots. They tend to think of sci-fi robots. And while they might not be clothed, sci-fi robots tend to be heavily designed for aesthetic appearance. You have C-3PO, who's golden, and R2-D2 has a particular set of colors. And I think there have been robots with cape. I'm trying to think of examples of clothed robots in sci-fi, and I'm not coming up with any. I think there's been some with capes, and that's about all I can think of. But unless they're pure androids, right? Unless they're pure androids, and then they're just acting as humans who happen to be robots, like Data or something.
I mean, the Dalek, it has a bunch of ornamentation that is not clothing, but also not
Pointless.
Obviously
right.
technically useful.
Yeah. So I guess to distill my question, how much of your thinking is influenced by that, and how much, at a second level, how much of what you think about doing is kind of to keep people in that lane where they're expecting things?
I think that animation has what's the word? So animators have this background in character design. So they can make the form exactly as they want, right? And think about the voice and the name and the textures kind of all together. And this is kind of what inspired me to dress robots in the first place. Because there's all this character design that goes into animated characters. But that doesn't always happen for robots. Can you repeat the question?
I guess, I didn't ask it very well.
It's okay.
And I think you did answer most of it there.
Okay.
Because that's, what inspired you to get into it. But I guess when you're thinking about clothing for a robot, how much are you thinking about the end user and what they're expecting versus either subverting those expectations or doing something that's purely, okay, this has a purpose and it's not purely aesthetic to line up with a random observer's expectation based on their history?
Yeah, I think starting with the user is usually the best place to start. So really just like observing the environment that the robot's going to end up in with the robot there. And like watching those interactions and then coming up with the design. I think it might be different for a performance, right? Like that is a place where we would want to subvert expectations. I recently saw there was a AI for Good clip with a bunch of different robots that were supposed to be representing different countries, and they were like different, I guess, values, and they were all wearing different clothes. I think it was Erica, the robot. I have to double check, but one of them was wearing like a nurse's outfit, and one of them was wearing like a totally bedazzled dress. And that was, in a way, kind of a performance, right? It's not, they're interacting with each other, and it was for film, right? So I think starting with the user when people are going to interact with it, and then kind of thinking about subverting expectations during when you're preparing a robot for performance.
And the user is the audience, the additional performer, the robot. I mean, who is the user here?
Well, during a performance, I guess the audience, yes. Anyone that's preparing the robot also, right? The engineers, the hardware engineers, and any additional actors too. I
have been enjoying the Murderbot Diaries by Martha Wells, who we had on the show a while ago. Thank you to Ben for noting the humble bundle that had all the audio. But SecUnit, who is the main character in Murderbot, uses its clothes as a way to hide. It hides behind its mask. When it later loses its helmet, it hides behind the clothes that it uses. And while it mostly hates everything, it does eventually enjoy custom clothes.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think robots want to wear clothing? Do you think robots will want to wear clothing?
I think if its goal is trying to hide, yes.
Trying to hide its emotions.
Oh, trying to hide its emotions. Okay, I see. I think that the word want is a tricky thing because it really anthropomorphizes the robot, right? It kind of assumes that this robot like has some kind of consciousness and desire. And I'm like constantly tempted to like use language that anthropomorphizes the robot. Like I want to say wire modesty or robot comfort.
Wire modesty.
But right, like so if we're thinking about like I guess trying to reach homeostasis, right, for humans and for robots, and not struggling to work, robots would want to remain comfortable in temperature and not get their cable snagged, and not being squashed, right? So maybe if clothes help the robot to maintain its comfort, then yes, they would want to wear clothing.
Okay. How much of your thesis is on robotics versus psychology versus fashion?
I would say most of it is psychology, and fashion. And then usually I have a paragraph at the end of that section that says, what does this mean for robots? And then I talk about how each like social implication of fashion will affect a robot's function. A lot of it, I guess, kind of the intersection of psychology and engineering is design. So I guess I would categorize the thesis as a design thesis, even though I'm formally in information science.
Can you describe your in layman's terms what your thesis, what the main topic is? Like, you don't have to defend it here, but defend your thesis.
Gosh, are you my committee? Yeah, so the official title is Designing Clothing for an Improved Human-Robot Interaction. So I have, I guess, 3 main projects that I'm focusing on. One, my design of that utility belt and like what my design process was for it. The second one is kind of a theoretical framework for all the functions of clothing. Kind of together, art practitioners and researchers came up with what our predictions of clothing for robots could be. And then thirdly, I interviewed anyone that I could find that is already dressing robots, and I asked them what their design process was, and then I'm sharing that, what the current practices are compared to those predictions that I made in the previous chapter.
Tell me more about the middle one, about the research into clothing.
So that was the one where I was getting together with like art practitioners and material scientists and engineers to think about the functions of clothing for robots. Is that the one you're talking about?
Yes.
Yeah, that was fun. Basically, we just had lots of design conversations about the robots we've seen in the world that are dressed so far, and basically we categorized all of those examples and all of our ideas into 3 kind of categories about the functions of clothes for robots that we predicted. And we kind of kept finding that every example would fit into one of these 3 categories. So the first one was protection, which I've talked about. The second one was social signaling. So that means, role, individual identity. And the third one was adaptability, right? So anything that makes the robot more adaptable into its context.
So like putting a jacket on a robot so it doesn't get too cold?
Yeah. Just like that. Mm-hmm.
Solar reflective blanket. I don't know. Yeah. Okay.
That works too.
Is there a corresponding theory of clothing for humans?
Talk about signaling. I mean, you mentioned status and you mentioned uniforms.
I'm sure it's talked about, but I don't know. I've never heard of it in that concise framing before. It seems like there should be an analog. And
does it fall down to the same 3 principles?
It does in so many ways. There's lots of different frameworks. There's one quote that I like about fashion, and it's from a book called Fashion is Spinach. And she basically says that fashion allows you to fit in just enough and stand out just enough. So that kind of represents the social signaling aspect. I want to get back to you on a specific framework.
Before we get to listener questions, do you have any questions for us?
What's your style?
Pajamas. And flip-flops.
Yeah.
Awesome.
To be a little more serious, when I'm out and about in technical arenas, conferences, I tend to dress more feminine than I would just going to the grocery. Because I can. Most of the places I go these days, I'm speaking, and so you can't really discount me because I'm a woman. And so therefore, if I dress as a woman, then people who dress as women maybe won't get discounted just for their dress. Does that make sense?
It does, definitely.
So I wear skirts a lot more if I'm doing technical things than otherwise. But I also wear skirts a fair amount to the beach just because my shorts are dirty.
Awesome.
Do you have a style, Christopher? I mean, other than a large, huge, monstrous collection of Star Wars t-shirts.
Probably standard nerd. Yeah. Jeans, t-shirts. I've been trying to wear more non-message t-shirts. I have a lot of t-shirts that are, Star Wars or band t-shirt or some
embedded t-shirts.
ridiculous, witty thing. Well, I have too many embedded t-shirts because we get a lot of our own shirts. But yeah, I don't wear a lot of black, but I think that's also standard nerd. The older I get, the less I care. So, but yeah, we're also beach people, so shorts and t-shirts are fairly common.
Right, you live in Aptos.
But I have discovered I have been starting to discover the benefits of utilitarian things like aprons. Like I've been doing a lot of woodworking, and I was complaining to Alicia that I was getting sawdust all over my clothes, and I had to keep segregating my clothes, taking them off before I got into rooms where I don't want sawdust. I was just, why don't you get an apron? I'm like, an apron?
And I'm pretty sure he thought it was going to be like frilly.
And they have, and I knew about them, but went and looked, and aprons with all these tool slots. So I got an apron with all these tool slots, and it's very convenient and keeps the clothes clean. And they have places for hammers and chisels and such. And so yes, utilitarian clothes can be quite nice.
It's great.
What about you? Do you have a style?
I like to dress like a scrapbook of lots of styles. So often like bright colors and fun textures that I find at thrift stores. Yeah.
Okay, I have a few listener questions.
Okay.
The first from Andre from the Great White North. Have you tried using the recent crop of laser cutters for textiles?
I have not, but I have used a Cricut machine that hobbyists usually use to create clothes for robots. I found that smaller parts make a lot more sense for the Cricut machine than large parts. Otherwise, you might as well just cut it, just because there's a lot of replacing that has to get done.
Yes. I mean, the Cricut's great, but you can only do this size or less.
Right.
11.5 inches. It gets old.
Right. Agreed.
How much do you create the clothing yourself versus buying something, I don't know, buying a 1-year-old onesie and then modifying it?
How big are these robots, do you think?
I don't know. It's going to be baby size in my head.
Baby robot.
I would say half and half. I've actually bought in doll patterns. Mm-hmm. So I made like a rain jacket for a doll. And then I put it on a keep-on. I don't know if you've seen the little yellow keep-ons. So, and that was kind of an effort just to learn how to sew. It's hard to be a PhD student, right, and do engineering, design, and then also learn how to sew, and be as good as a tailor. So sometimes I have outsourced that work.
Sure. Peter wanted to know if robot clothing would be also in the form of magnetic clip-on panels that could auto-detect with the robot so it understood its capabilities, or so that other people could see, as with what Christopher was saying, you maybe put on different magnetic patterns so that people don't get too accustomed to the robot.
I love that idea. I would say sometimes it can be risky putting magnets on robots because it can mess with the mechanisms inside. So I think there would have to be a lot of testing.
It's not as bad as you'd expect.
Great.
It depends on if they have Hall effect sensors.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on where you put the magnets, but overall, if you're using the thin film adhesive magnets, it's not a big deal.
As I've learned from my Kindle. Having magnets in weird places can do confusing things.
Oh no. Yeah, I've put magnets on a robot, and I just got a lot of sliding, but I think adding adhesive to the back would have been a great idea. There was another part to that question. Oh yeah, so I actually have seen robots that can sense their clothes. There's a researcher at KTH, her name's Ylva Frenius, and she made a robot that could sense when it was wearing pajamas so that it would go to sleep. And I thought that was so brilliant.
That seems like a lot more work than a button. I mean, it's cute,
but you got the experience of clothing a robot in pajamas.
Wouldn't that get old after like the 4th day?
This is why you're not a parent.
Absolutely.
Where's the button, kid? Enough with these pajamas. This is very fascinating because I think as robots become more prevalent in people's lives, well, like Roombas, people do things to Roombas. Okay.
They do.
That didn't come out right. But I mean, ours has googly eyes.
Ours has googly eyes. Is that something that you've seen or is that part of your research, is seeing what consumers do to consumer robots?
Yes. So I actually know someone, her name's Elizabeth Goodman, and she wrote an Instructables for dressing your Roomba like a mouse. And she thought, the Roomba moves like a mouse, so it should dress like a mouse. So she has this Instructables. And I've also seen on Etsy, people were noticing that the robot was ending up under a couch and couldn't get out. So they were adding little bumpers that you could stick onto your Roomba so that it wouldn't get stuck under the robot. It's totally brilliant to me.
Sure. Roombas in particular tend to form attachments. That went backwards. People tend to form attachments to their Roombas, to their specific Roomba, not to the brand. I mean, Chris Veck has told us that iRobot, sometimes they say, I don't want a different one. You can't replace it. You have to fix this one. Do you think that people will dress robots more if they feel... Do you think it'll be like dogs, like little dogs that end up getting dressed whether they want to or not?
I think yes. We've definitely seen it with Roombas, and I'm looking forward to seeing it with more. There was one YouTuber who brings Pepper along in her car and takes videos of her and Pepper dressed for the day. And she calls it Pepper Days. And one day they were going in the rain and Pepper wore a raincoat. And I think she's probably very attached to her specific Pepper.
And Pepper's the robot, not a dog, just to be clear.
Yes, just to be clear, Pepper is a robot made by SoftBank.
Oh.
Do you think it's good for robot manufacturers to be trying to make anthropomorphic robots? Again, I'll bring up the example of Tesla, which I'm not super a fan of what they're doing there, but there've been Tesla and was it Asimo? Honda's Asimo? Is that the right?
Asimo, yeah.
And there've been others where people are just trying to make, the standard sci-fi android-shaped robot. Is that a good idea?
I would say no. I think that a walking robot doesn't make as much sense as a rolling robot, right? Like there are limitations that that the form of our body has that just doesn't work for a robot. I think that there are also a lot of expectations that come with making a robot look like a person. For example, if you put ears on a robot, that makes people think that that's where the microphones are, or that that the robot can hear. And if you put eyes on a robot, it's the same thing. So I think that there is a risk to it. But I guess, again, like walking versus rolling might depend on the context that the robot will end up in.
On the flip side, Boston Dynamics tends to make robots that look like evil hellhounds. Is that a good idea?
Yes, because they are evil.
Or should they be dressed up in some way to make them less intimidating?
Maybe a little rain jacket, a pink one with a tutu.
I'm being entirely serious here.
But no, you're right. Should they be less scary?
I think if they're going to end up in environments where they're not intimidating people or animals, then yes, they should be less scary. There's this idea of like honest anthropomorphism, right? So you put the camera where the eyes are. So people know that the robot is watching and can see. And I think maybe that this idea could apply to like kind of this intimidating movement and form factor from Boston Dynamics. Like, I guess just be honest about what you're going to do via the form. So maybe if they are going to, I mean, hopefully they don't hurt anyone, but if they are going to, maybe the form should match that.
Sure. No. Going back to sci-fi, there's been plenty of sci-fis where friendly-looking robots are actually the evil robots. I suppose they should, in that honesty, they should put the CPU in the head so that if you had to disable it with a baseball bat, you'd know where to hit it.
Yeah, Sec
like
Unit doesn't keep his brains in his head. So, do we want to trust robots? Do we want to anthropomorphize them? Is this just a bad idea? I mean, because they're not...
Well, I think what she's saying is doing it for its own sake is not a good idea.
Okay.
Right? Or putting words in your mouth, sorry.
No, it's okay. I think that it all comes back to responsible designers, right? So if the designers want to be honest with the users, then they should design accordingly. And sometimes that means anthropomorphizing and sometimes that doesn't.
Okay.
And just don't do it thoughtlessly, I guess.
Exactly.
Which is pretty easy because I think, again, going back to sci-fi, a lot of designers probably start with, well, it's a robot. Let's make it robot-y.
Yeah. I mean, I still accidentally dress robots like people once in a while, right? Like, and then I say, shoot, like I should not have put that bracelet on the robot. Like, why did I do that? It just like makes noise and like doesn't match the context, right? But it's so easy to say, oh, I have a bracelet. I'm just going to put it on the robot.
I mean, going back to the Boston Dynamics Hellhound, I don't know its name, but I think that's appropriate. I don't know how you would put clothing on that in a way that wouldn't inhibit its movement. It looks like that for a reason. Not to intimidate, but because it needs that freedom of movement. And I don't know the specifics. Maybe you could put pink plastic all over it to make it friendly.
Yeah. I mean, I think that there are options for clothing that are not necessarily fabric, right? Like you could put a decal on the robot to match wherever it's going. I've seen that done with Relay, the robot made by Savioke. The robot goes to hotels and works at the hotel, and it wears like a badge and it wears a bow tie and it wears the logo of the hotel. So I think that there are ways to avoid inhibiting movement with clothes without actually, putting fabric on the robot.
Okay, so clothes does not imply fabric.
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
I would say anything that's removable.
And things that are changeable on a frequent basis. Is that a fair analysis?
Yeah, I think so. And hopefully by anyone, right? By the user or by the engineer. Like you shouldn't have to have a screwdriver to take on and off the clothes.
Okay.
I have an off-the-wall question for you, since we've been talking about people interacting with robots or things but things that appear to be human or human-shaped. Okay. How do you feel about large language models like ChatGPT and the way that they don't pretend exactly, but the way that they try to...
They clearly pretend.
Well, the way that their interactions with humans appear to be human-like. That's not exactly a robot, but it is a robot-adjacent thing where humans are interacting with a computer in a way that a computer is not dressed up exactly, but is pretending or evoking human behavior or appearance.
That idea of honest anthropomorphism keeps coming back to my mind. I've had the experience before where someone was using ChatGPT to email me, and my trust for him significantly went down. Because we've had having conversations and the tone was just so different. So I think that there's definitely a kind of inauthenticity that comes about with ChatGPT. Were you asking about ChatGPT like in relationship to clothes? I'm just trying to understand your question.
It's kind of an analogy that sprung in my head. Like,
okay,
we anthropomorphize the appearance of robots,
mm-hmm.
but it feels like with ChatGPT we're anthropomorphizing
Different
information or the way that a computer speaks. Because the way we used to interact with computers were with queries and search results that are obviously computers, or with graphical user interfaces that are obviously computers. And now moving it toward, we're having a conversation with the computer, and it's acting just like, well, it sounds like a human.
Right.
And they seem like very parallel concepts to me.
I love that. I think that's a great analogy. There has been some studies on politeness, robot politeness, where a participant was interacting with a computer, and then it asked that person, how did it do? And people were more likely to rate it well when they interacted with that computer compared to a different one when it was talking about the one it originally talked to. So people want to look good for, or have a connection to a robot in a way.
Yeah.
So it kind of reminds me of that, like, inauthenticity, right? So if you say, like, hello, I hope you had a good day to ChatGPT, like, it'll say the same thing back, and that's not real. Like, it doesn't actually hope that you had a good day.
Right.
It's just like this element of politeness that is completely programmed and is ingenuine, because machines don't have hopes and desires, I would argue.
Yeah. Okay.
It's a great analogy.
Yeah. No, yeah. I seems like you're thinking along the same lines, but yeah. We're entering a different world here where there is a lot of inauthenticity, and I liked your honesty approach to it, and I think that needs to be applied in more places.
Thanks.
But when you go away from Android robots, the anthropomorphic authenticity becomes more difficult. I mean, you could make something look like a bug, and that would indicate where its eyes are.
Mm-hmm.
But then it's creepy like a bug. And I mean, I find mice kind of creepy.
Uh-huh.
So I wouldn't want a Roomba mouse. But you could talk me into a Roomba cuttlefish pretty easily.
Oh, that'd be cute.
The little things would help vacuum, it would, the little tentacles would scoop in. I mean, it would look very Cthulhu-like, but awesome.
I would love to see you do that. I guess anthropomorphism is a bit more challenging when it's not on, like, a human form. But right, if you put eyes on your Roomba, right? So that may signal that there are cameras in that area.
Sure, we could have put them near the camera. Yeah,
that would have been a good idea.
Yeah, it's a difficult topic, and I'm glad that people are thinking about these things in this way, because I sometimes feel like engineering just kind of goes, wow, here's some stuff, we put it together, and you're going to buy it.
I have a Hall effect sensor, an IMU, and 3 motors. What can I build? And then there's no thought of, how do I make it good or approachable? I just have the thing. And even if I'm solving a particular problem, it's just direct.
I feel like the last 10 years, design has kind of gone by the wayside, and things have become more utilitarian and flat. And I think there's still a place for design and thinking about how computers and humans interact with each other, not as friends necessarily.
Definitely not as trusted friends.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying anything about my friends being untrustworthy. That was not an implication. Natalie, it's been really great to talk to you. Do you have any thoughts you'd like to leave us with?
Oh, yeah. Okay. My last thought is the best thing that you can wear is a smile.
Unless you're a robot and you're not really happy.
I'm talking to people right now.
Or you're a robot and you don't have a mouth.
I have no mouth and I cannot smile. Sorry.
Our guest has been Natalie Friedman, information science PhD candidate at Cornell Tech.
Thanks, Natalie. This was fascinating.
Thanks so much.
Thank you to Christopher for producing and co-hosting. Thank you to our Patreon listener Slack group for questions. And thank you for listening. You can always contact us at show@embedded.fm or hit the contact link on Embedded FM. And now a quote to leave you with. Let's go with Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy by Douglas Adams. Don't blame you, said Marvin, and counted 597,000 million sheep before falling asleep a second later.